Welcome back to Physical Anthropology. Today we're looking at Chapter 5, Meet the Living Primates. Today we're going to go over the characteristics of the class Mammalia, so basically what makes you a mammal. We'll also look at the characteristics of the order Primata, which are primates in general. And then we're going to go into a lot more detail on primate taxonomy and a bunch of subgroups that fall under the category of primate and what makes each of those groups unique and some example animals that belong to that group. So what is a primate? A primate belongs into a larger grouping called the class Mammalia. So all mammals belong in this group. And mammals are unique in the sense that they all have fur or hair. They're warm-blooded or endothermic. They produce milk for their young through their mammary glands, and they have four-chambered hearts. So these are characteristics of every single animal in the group Mammalia. In addition to that, most of them do give live birth. There are a few unique mammals who still lay eggs, but the vast majority do give live birth, and that would include primates as well. So they are placental animals. They carry their young inside until they are ready to give birth. And in addition to that, they provide a lot of childcare while the offspring is growing up. So now let's look at order Primates, which is a subgroup of mammals. And these are going to include all of our monkeys, our apes, as well as animals like lemurs. So primates did evolve quite a long time ago, about 90 million years ago. So there were still dinosaurs around at this time, but they started to become very unique. And what made them unique was their habitat. So they lived in the forest, and you'll see that there are many traits that primates have in common with animals that live in trees or live in the woods. So what are some unique primate traits? First, we've moved away from the use of smell for things like communication and for interacting with our environment. Instead, we use vision a lot more. We rely a lot on our vision. And what you can see about that is if you look at these skull features of primates, their eye sockets are in the front of their head. So having the two eyes in the front of your head allows you to have 3D vision, which is really important if you're going to be living in the trees and jumping from tree branch to tree branch. You need to be able to estimate distances and accurately figure all of that out. Another interesting thing about our eyes is that primates have color vision. Okay, so some animals do have color vision, some do not. They only see in basically shades of gray. But within that color vision, many primates have very good color vision. They have something called trichromatic color vision, which means they can distinguish yellows, reds, and blues and greens. Now, some primates only have dichromatic vision, which means they can only really distinguish between blues and greens and not the yellow and the red. Another interesting feature is our large brains. So mammals in general are capable of learning, childcare, like I said. Many mammals do live in social groups, but primates very much are like that. Okay, so because they live in social groups, they've had to learn very complex behaviors in terms of how they interact with each other. And these large brains take a lot of time and energy to learn. So for that reason, we also have something called an extended life history. That means that primates live a long time, and during that time period, they remain juveniles for a long period of time. And while they're juveniles, they're learning from their mother, usually primarily their mother, but also from other members of their social group. Another really unique feature is the hands and feet of primates. So we have something called an opposable thumb or an opposable big toe. So many of the primates still also have opposable big toes. That's something that humans have lost through evolution. But when you look at them, this is the way that they are able to live in that arboreal environment. So the arboreal environment, again, means with trees. And so we're able to grasp branches and things like that, rather than using claws to climb up on the tree. Another thing on the right-hand side, I can say shorter snouts. So in general, we have flatter faces than other types of mammals. Most mammals that are still using their sense of smell have much longer snouts. Think of like a dog. A pentadactyly, that means we have 5 fingers. That's true for other animals as well, that they have 5 digits. However, the way we use our hands and our feet is that they're much more dexterous and they're able to manipulate objects. Instead of claws, we now have flattened nails. We do have tactile pads. That's basically your finger pad. It's what makes you able to pick up objects because there's some friction there. So if you've ever wondered why you have fingerprints, that's kind of why that's happening, so that you can pick up an object and it doesn't slip out of your hands. And in general, most primates do still live in very tropical environments. Of course, humans are unique in that we can live in basically any kind of habitat because we're able to change our environment to suit our own needs. Now, dental characteristics is a very good way of distinguishing animals from each other, especially if, for example, all you had was the skull of an animal. If you have the skull of the animal, you can still identify its species based on things like what type of teeth they have and the number of each type of tooth. So primates are often considered to be a little bit more general in the types of foods that they eat. While there are some species that are very specific in what they eat, many of them are opportunistic enough that even if they primarily eat vegetation, they might still eat insects occasionally. They might still eat egg if they find it, or a small bird or mammal if they find it and catch it. So because of that, we have what's called heterodont teeth. So that means that we have different shape and size of teeth because of the different functions of those teeth. So if you look at the image on the left, humans and other primates have incisors, canines, premolars, and molars, and the shape of those teeth are unique. You can identify how many of each you have by looking at 1/4 of your jaw. So basically from the front of your jaw, counting all the way to the back on one side, and we get a dental formula. So what you see is the dental formula for primates. If you're a New World monkey, you have something called a 2:1:3:3 ratio. That means you have 2 of these incisors, 1 canine, 3 premolars, and then 3 molars. And this would be, for example, on the bottom right side of your jaw. And then of course, the other side is a mirror image. And then also the top jaw would be the same. Now the dental formula for human is a little bit different. We only have 2 premolars. So we've lost one of those premolars over the course of evolution. Another thing you can see in the teeth is something called a diastema. A diastema is a little gap. And if you look at the monkey on the right, that's a baboon, see how this monkey has very large canines. So when it's closing its jaw, there has to be a little bit of a gap between these teeth to allow the jaw to close fully. Okay, so to give a little space for those teeth. But you also see some animals that have a very large diastema because they're missing canines. So if you look at certain herbivores like a horse or a rabbit, where they don't eat any kind of meat, they will actually be missing a canine and they will have a large gap in their teeth there. So as I mentioned, this is called heterodont teeth pattern. There's something called homodont. Homodont just means that all of the teeth are exactly the same shape. And there are animals that have that. For example, in this picture, the bottlenose dolphin, that one just eats fish. And you can see that it has lots and lots of teeth, but all the teeth look identical to each other in terms of shape. There's no unique incisor, canine, premolar, or molar. So what kinds of things do primates eat? There are some differences in species of primates based on their diet. So some groups are frugivores. Frugivore means that they eat primarily fruit. Fruit is a very highly nutritious type of food because there's a lot of sugar in fruit. I'm sure if you enjoy eating fruit because it tastes sweet, that's the reason why, okay? Because there's a lot of sugar in it that provides a lot of calories. And what you'll see with animals like this is they're gonna have very large incisors. They're gonna have molars for grinding. And they're going to have an intermediate digestive system because it does take some time to digest the food, but sugars in general are not super complex. Things like sucrose and fructose are not very complex molecules to digest. Some primates are insectivores, meaning they eat little bugs and insects that they find in the trees. And these guys are going to have much sharper molars. If you take a look at that, they have very pointed molars, but they still have a relatively simple digestive tract. Now, many primates are folivores, meaning they primarily eat leaves. Leaves are less nutritious than fruit because their sugars are much more complex molecules. Okay, so they have a lot of very large polysaccharide molecules, which are difficult to digest and break down. So for this reason, these type of animals would have very broad molars to help with the grinding down of those leaves. And they would spend a lot of their time eating. Okay, so they would have very large molars for grinding, and they would have specialized digestive systems with special enzymes and even microbes that live in there to help them with digesting things like cellulose. Now, how do primates get along? They basically, if they live in the trees, one of the ways that they can go from one tree to another is something called vertical clinging and leaping. So in vertical clinging and leaping, it's exactly what it sounds like. The animal is hanging onto the trunk in a vertical position. So their spine is sort of up and down, and they're grasping it with their fingers as well as their feet. And then they're going to jump from one tree branch to the other and leap from one to the other. So there's quite a few that do that. You'll see lemurs have this type of pattern. Another common pattern is quadrupedalism. So quadrupedalism means walking around on all 4 of your limbs. And in this picture, what you see is a baboon, which is a monkey that actually still lives on the ground rather than in the trees. So it's going to be running around on the ground, but you see that it's on all of its toes. So you can see in the skeleton that all the toes are basically touching the ground. A subtype of quadrupedalism is called knuckle walking. Knuckle walking is something that gorillas and chimpanzees do. And the way they do that is they are using all 4 limbs on the ground. However, their front limbs, their fingers are curled under like a fist. So if you take a look at the picture here, you can clearly see that they are actually walking on their front knuckles while their back feet are flat on the ground. Then we have brachiation. Brachiation, you can usually really clearly identify that on a skeleton because they have really, really, really long forelimbs. So the arms look much longer in proportion compared to the legs. And what these guys do is what you would imagine when you're swinging on those monkey bars. You know, we call them monkey bars for a reason, but when you were swinging on a monkey bar as a child and you went from one hand to the next hand to the next hand, and your feet aren't really involved in that process. So that's called brachiation. And then finally, the last category is bipedalism, and only humans are completely bipedal. There are some apes like gorillas and chimpanzees that can stand upright and might even walk around on 2 feet occasionally, but that's not their primary mode of locomotion. So what are some things you could look at for quadrupedalism versus brachiation? Again, the arms are longer in brachiators. Another thing would be the collarbone. Okay, so you have a longer collarbone. The collarbone is a part of your pectoral girdle. Okay, so it's what allows you to have muscle attachments for your arms. And in general, the brachiators also don't have a tail. So that's going to be, these are going to be like the orangutan and the gibbon, which are apes, and apes do not have a tail, while the quadrupedal monkeys all still have tails. Okay, so my first question for you. Which of the following traits are present in all primates? A, fur, enhanced sense of smell, arboreal capabilities. B, hair, reduced sense of taste, bipedalism. C, hair, enhanced sense of vision, complex brains. Or D, fur, reduced sense of touch, and complex brains. So take a minute to think about that and see if you can figure out the correct answer. So I hope you picked C. Remember that because we are mammals, we do have hair. We do have that enhanced sense of vision, so 3D vision as well as color vision. And then we have quite complex brains. So now let's look at some subgroupings under the order of Primata. So the first category we're going to look at is something called the Strepsirrhini and the Haplorhini. So that's the suborder. Then we're going to go into more detail on the lemurs and the lorises. Those guys basically live in Africa and mostly the island of Madagascar. So they're kind of a more ancient form of primate is what I would use, because if you look at the taxonomy here, so this is like a family tree, and you can see that they split off very early in history. So when the primates split into the Strepsirrhini and the Haplorhini, then that's when the lemurs were evolving, while humans, you're going to see humans are at the very bottom of this chart. So we're just doing all of these primates as they compare to humans. And the closer you are on this chart, the more related you are to a human. Then we're going to talk about Old World and New World monkeys. So the Old World monkeys are going to be all of the animals here in the Platyrrhini grouping, while the New World monkeys are going to be, sorry, these are the New World monkeys, are the Platyrrhini. The Old World monkeys are going to be over here and over here. So those are the new and old world monkeys. Then we also have the apes. So the apes are going to be in this category, which are the hominoids. Now there are some other vocabulary terms that you might hear about when you read a textbook on anthropology. So there's something called a prosimian. Prosimian is when we were grouping these primates together based on certain characteristics like their nocturnal behavior and their vertical clinger leaper behavior. And what we did is we grouped the lemurs, the lorises, and the tarsiers all together as prosimians. However, since then, more data has come out. So we've done a lot of DNA analysis. And what we learned is that tarsiers actually are closer related to humans in our group rather than to the lemurs and the lorises. So they had a common ancestor more recently with humans. So they actually belong in the Haplorhini grouping. Also, kind of going along with that, another term you might hear are anthropoids. So anthropoids are going to include monkeys and apes and ignore the tarsiers, even though, like I said, the tarsiers are actually more closely related to us. Next, hominids. So hominids is a term that in the past was used only for humans and our immediate extinct ancestors. So only our bipedal ancestors like the Homo erectus, the Australopithecines, and things like that. But now we've narrowed down that category to use the term hominin. Okay, so hominin is for the humans and our bipedal ancestors, while hominids actually include other great apes as well. Okay, so now let's look at the Strepsirrhini and the Haplorhini in more close comparison. So on the left-hand side, these are going to be our more kind of ancestral traits of primates. These guys still have a longer snout. Okay, they have something called a tapetum lucidum. That means that they have a special layer in their eye to help them with night vision. And that's because many of them are actually nocturnal. Okay, so they come out at night. They might be eating lots of insects, and insects like to come out during dusk and dawn. There are some that eat, plants as well, but when you look at their dentition, you can see that many of them are in that insectivore category. They may be solitary or live in some small groups, like family groups. And there's not really sexual dimorphism, so you can't really distinguish between males and females easily just by looking at them. In comparison, let's look at the Haplorhini. We have a much shorter snout. Okay, so again, you're going to see the evolution of a flatter face because we're going to be relying more on our vision. We do not have the tapetum lucidum. We do have something called a fovea. That means you have very good central vision, and these guys are going to be trichromatic. So we have really good color vision. Almost all of this group is diurnal, meaning they are active during the day, which is why that color vision comes in handy. And then again, there's many different types of social groups. We'll look at that in more detail in the future. Some of them do have quite a bit of sexual dimorphism, which means that males and females are easy to distinguish from each other. So now let's look at the lemurs, aye-ayes, and indries. They belong in their own category, the Lemuroidea. They're only found on the island of Madagascar. Okay, so that's because whenever you have animals that isolate on an island, they tend to have a few predators there, and so they're able to evolve rather quickly and take over lots of different ecological niches, and they're able to survive there quite well. However, on the main continent of Africa, there would be a lot of competition with other animals, and the other types of primates were more successful in Africa. Basically, the lemurs went extinct there. We do see lorises and galagos in Central Africa. So that's in their own group. They're in the Lorisoidea group. And they also are found in Asia. So as I said, most of them are nocturnal. With lemurs, we do see some diurnal behavior on the island of Madagascar. We talked about dietary types, insectivore and frugivore. We talked about their social groupings. Notice that the loris and the galagos, these guys are always solitary. And then in terms of how they get around, many of the lemurs are your vertical climber leapers, and then there are some that are quadrupedal as well, while the lorises and galagos are mostly just going to be quadrupedal climbers, meaning they do live in the trees, but they're going around on all four of their limbs. So now let's look at the tarsiers. The tarsiers, like I said, do belong in this grouping of Haplorhini. So they are the most distant relatives of humans that are still within the group Haplorhini. And they're very unique. There's no other primates that belong into this group, just the tarsiers. So what's going on with them? What's interesting is that they're the only ones in the Haplorhini that are really nocturnal still. And we can tell that they're nocturnal because they have gigantic eyes, like really big eyes. And what's going on with that is that they need to be able to see well at night, right? But because they don't have very good night vision in terms of, they don't have that tapetum lucidum we were talking about. Instead, what has happened is their eyes have evolved to be really big to allow in as much light as possible. So very large eyes. They're actually only found in Southeast Asia, specifically in the Philippine Islands. They do have grooming claws, and they're going to be faunivorous. All right, next, let's look at these two groups. So the Platyrrhini versus the Catarrhini. What's going on with these guys? Well, the Platyrrhini are also sometimes referred to as the New World monkeys. So what do we mean by New World versus Old World? New World would be the Americas, right? Like Christopher Columbus sailed to the New World. So New World monkeys all live in South America, while the Old World monkeys are the ones who stayed in Africa and continue to evolve in Africa. So what's going on with these New World monkeys? They're definitely highly arboreal. And the main distinction between the two groups is their nose. So Platyrrhini means flat nose. So that kind of tells you this characteristic. So they have a flat nose versus the Catarrhini have a different type of nose. It's a teardrop shaped nostril that are very close together. So that's kind of the unique distinction where they got their name from. Going back to the Platyrrhini, they are very arboreal, like I said. There's not that much sexual dimorphism, but they do have this 2-1-3-3 dental formula. That's going to be a unique trait because the Catarrhini in comparison have the 2-1-2-3 dental formula. And then while they do have color vision, not all of them have as extensive color vision as the Catarrhini, because the Catarrhini, all of these guys are going to be trichromatic. Another kind of unique feature is that some of the New World monkeys do have something called a prehensile tail. So prehensile tail is when you see this tail that looks like it's curling under. What's really cool about it is they can use it to grab onto tree branches. So in addition to their forelimbs and their hind limbs grabbing on, they can also use their tail. So they have 5 points of contact. You also sometimes see them hanging just by their tail, which is really cool that the tail can actually support them. That means that their body sizes tend to be smaller. Okay, in comparison, the Old World monkeys might be a little bit larger in body size. And then we'll talk about behavior more later. Okay, so that takes care of that grouping. Let's look a little bit at their teeth. So the Platyrrhini right here, this is their teeth versus the Catarrhini are the other two images. And the main thing that they're pointing out to you here is something called the Y5 molars. So the Y5 molar means that there are 5 cusps in the molar at the back of your teeth. So this is something that the human still has as well. Okay, so we have this type of molar versus the Platyrrhini has something called a bilophodont molar. Okay. In addition to that, on the left, I have an image of something called a tooth comb. So the tooth comb is only found in the Platyrrhini. Sorry, let me clarify that. The image on the left is the tooth comb found in a lemur. Okay, so in the lemur, the incisors can often be found very close together and they make what looks like a comb, and that's actually how the animal uses it. So it will use it to groom its fur to pick out insects and other debris. All right, so now we're moving on to the 5th category, which is going to be down here. This is subgroups of the Catarrhini, and the subgroups are the Cercopithecidae and the Hominoidea. So what's going on with them? The Cercopithecidae are actually also referred to as the Old World monkeys. Okay, so these guys are monkeys, but they live mostly in Africa, sometimes in Southeast Asia as well. They have the bilophodont molars that I mentioned. They also have something called ischial that's over here. And that's these special fatty pads on their behind. So when they sit down, that's what they're sitting on, and there's not fur covering it. So animals that belong in this group are the leaf monkeys and the cheek pouch monkeys. On the other side, we see the Hominoidea. So these guys are going to be our apes, and we'll go into more detail about them. But a main thing about apes is they do not have tails like the other monkeys do. So the monkeys all have tails, apes do not. They tend to be much larger in body size. In fact, some of them get very, very big, and they're only going to be found in Africa and Asia. You do not see apes in the New World. They also have that Y5 molar that I showed you in the previous picture, and they're going to have longer lifespans as well. All right, so my next review question for you is, many Old World primates have blank vision that helps them easily find food. Is it A, monochromatic, B, dichromatic, C, trichromatic, or D, non-chromatic? Did you figure it out? So the answer should have been C, trichromatic. That means that they are able to see those yellows, reds, greens, and blues. So our first category of apes that we're going to be talking about are the lesser apes. So the lesser apes include things like gibbons and siamangs. And they are slightly larger than most monkeys, but they do still live primarily in the trees. And what they do is they're going to be swinging around from branch to branch using a special locomotion. Hopefully you remember when you're swinging from your arms, what is that called? So they are brachiators, and they have very, very long arms. In general, you don't have too much sexual dimorphism, so the males and females are approximately the same size, same coloring. And they do eat plant matter. Okay, so gibbons are mostly frugivorous, while the siamongs are frugivorous. Next, let's look at the orangutans. So the orangutan is the first of our great apes. Great apes means that they're even larger, and they're going to be more closely related to humans as well. So these guys actually live in Asia, but not in Africa. The other two great apes that we'll look at only live in Africa. They are frugivorous, so they eat fruit. They are brachiators. They're diurnal, so they're hanging out during the day. And they're actually solitary, meaning that while the mother will stay with her infant and take care of her child while it's growing up, she does not live with a mate or with other members of a social group. They're quite sexually dimorphic. So male orangutans have very large cheek flaps, and these cheek flaps are called phalanges. The next great ape we're going to look at is the gorilla. So the gorilla lives in Africa, as I said. It's a plant eater. It uses that knuckle walking, which I showed you previously for getting around. So it doesn't actually live in the trees. It lives on the ground in the forest floor. They do show sexual dimorphism. The males are much larger than the females. They can get really, really heavy. And they also have something called a silverback. So the fur color of gorillas is basically black, but as the male matures, the back of his body starts to have this more grayish hair, and that's where we got that term silverback. In addition, if you take a look at the image of the skull, that is a gorilla skull, and they have this very interesting thing right here at the top of their skull called a sagittal crest. That is there as an attachment point for muscles. So they have these huge muscles that are bound from their skull all the way down to their jaw, and these huge muscles allow them to grind their food. So as I said, they actually eat plants. Sometimes people think that they're carnivores because they have these really large canines right here, but the large canines are actually for things like display. So to threaten any intruders to their territory, or to signal that they are superior. So we're going to talk about a hierarchy in the social grouping. But the males will use that sometimes to scare away others, but they're not using it to eat meat. The next category is pan. So these are going to be our chimpanzees. There's also another type of pan called the bonobo. Both chimpanzees and bonobos live in Africa. They are slightly different from each other, mostly due to their social structure and their behaviors, but they're both closely related to humans. And they do eat a lot of plant material, but like I said previously, they'll eat other things opportunistically, whether it's insects or fruit or little animals if they can catch and hunt an animal. They do have a little bit of sexual dimorphism, but not nearly as much as you saw with the gorilla. So the males do tend to be a little bit larger than the females. The females also will display something called estrus swelling, which means that they're signaling that they are ready to mate, and then that they're reproductively available. So the next question for you is, if you observe that the male primates in a group have larger canines than the female primates, this would be an example of what? A, sexual selection, B, sexual dimorphism, C, homodont dentition, or D, non-honing. So take a minute to think about that. And I hope you selected B. It is a form of sexual dimorphism. This is going to be usually for male to male competition, where the males are fighting each other to get access to females. The last group I'm going to talk about is the genus Homo. So this is going to be humans and our very closely related extinct ancestors. And we do belong in that same group as the great apes. Okay, so we do share a lot of traits with other hominoids. We don't have a tail. We do have those Y5 molars. Our dental formula is 2, 1, 2, 3. We have long lifespans where we take care of children, and the children need a long time for their brains to develop. Our brains are capable of very complex behaviors. Now, what makes us unique in comparison to other great apes is that we are fully bipedal. We do not use knuckle walking. We don't really live in the trees either, right? So we walk on our two legs, we're completely bipedal, and that's what's comfortable for us. That's how our skeleton has evolved. We also have not just slightly large brains, but incredibly large brains for our body size. And this allows us to have very complex behaviors, including modifying our environment, using tools, and the ability to communicate with language. But just so you know, those unique traits, only a few genes are responsible for that, because we actually share a ton of our DNA with our close living primate relatives. We share up to 96% of our DNA with gorilla and more than 98% with pan. So that wraps it up for chapter 5.